Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Kellum-Pathe. Welcome to another Leica Conversations. Before I introduce today's guest, a little bit of housekeeping. You'll see that connected to this window, there is a chat function. We would love to hear where you are tuning in from, and this is also a great space for you to ask questions during the program. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our guest, Adam Schokora. Adam, so good to see you today. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Nathan. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, as we begin to look through your beautiful imagery, I want for you to share a little more about yourself. Introduce yourself to the audience. Do you mind sharing a little bit about where you come from, where you are now, and how you got there?
Yeah, sure. I'm originally from the United States. I grew up in Detroit. Went to school there, and after university, I pretty much for the last 15, 20 years have been traveling and working most of that time in Asia. And I'm currently based in Shanghai, China, where I run a small creative agency, doing a lot of creative direction work, as well as commercial photography and commercial direction.
I hear that you are, you love to travel, and a lot of your images that we're going to see today showcase that. Let's start off with this first image right here on the slide. I believe this was taken in Morocco. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about this shot? I really, really love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I shot this. Interestingly, this was the first trip just a few days after I got my M11. This was with the 135 millimeter lens, shot in Rabat, which is along the coast there, as you can tell. It was just a kind of a magical moment of light and life here. This surfer was probably, I think he was coming in basically after his last wave of the day because the sun's coming down. Um, just perfect. We had a bit of mist in the air, so it kind of created a nice mood, good atmospherics. And because it's backlit, it's a little bit, it's abstracted with and presents some really cool silhouettes. Um, yeah, I mean, a surfing image is always, I'm a sucker for a surfing image. So this kind of checks quite a few boxes in terms of stuff I like to capture.
Actually, and also around sunset. I mean, you can't beat these colors, right? Where the sun's going down,
Yeah,
you get these silhouettes, like you were saying. I love your use of layers, right? With the 135, you get this compression, you get this depth, you have the foreground that kind of leads us to the surfer, and then behind the surfer, you have the lighthouse, and then behind the lighthouse, you have the sun. Um, we're
absolutely.
both lovers of the 135. I'm not going to be trying to shy away from that. It's such a phenomenal lens, and a lens that I bring all the time with me. Is this the lens that you bring with you on your travels as well? Do you walk around with the 135, or did you see this shot and said, "Oh, this is going to be perfect for the 135"?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm traveling, the 135 is always in my kit for sure. And it's in my backpack when I'm walking around on the ground. And yeah, this is absolutely like the perfect scenario for the 135.
Absolutely. Let's look at some more shots. This one, I believe, was in Michigan, so moving around the world. And I
Yeah, I mean,
believe this was shot with. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I'm from Michigan, so this is kind of going back home, if you will. Yeah, this was also shot with the M11, 50 millimeter Summilux. Um, yeah, it's just a really fun image. I mean, I don't know if anyone's traveled up in northern Michigan, but I don't know. I've been to a lot of places around the world, and I still think it's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. It's just gorgeous, especially in summer. I mean, Michigan summers are the best. So yeah, I shot this with the 50 millimeter Summilux, and it was a bit tricky because that's actually my wife in front of me. But I was also trying to kind of focus on a bike behind her, which is a little tricky when everything's manual, of course. And
Sure.
I was shooting fairly wide open, I believe, maybe even totally wide open on that one. But yeah,
Yeah.
this is just another one of those kind of golden hour, sun kissed sort of summer moments. It's a very, for me, just because I'm from that part of the country, it's a very sort of it takes me right back to Michigan. I mean, in the background you have Port Huron. Like I said, it's northern Michigan, so that's I'm not Port Huron. I'm sorry, Lake Huron. right about at the point where it connects with Lake Michigan. So that's kind of geographically a pretty interesting spot. And that landmass in the background is actually the Upper Peninsula, which most people don't know too much about in terms of Michigan, but there it is. And I just love this image. It's great. I mean, it's super summer. It's got that real sun-kissed vibe to it. And I really like how the road is sort of a leading line into the sun, and you got the hair kind of blowing up and enjoying the sort of last light of this bike ride.
Do you often have the opportunity to come back to Michigan?
Yeah, I mean, I used to come back quite a bit, at least once a year, sometimes twice. In the last few years, it's been tricky because of COVID, but yeah, I mean, now going forward, I think I probably will get back to the once or twice a year schedule.
And when you do go back, do you try to revisit places that you've been before? Are you all about trying to find new places? How do you kind of go about these kinds of things?
Well, I mean, in Michigan, there's because it's kind of surrounded by lakes, it's a great spot in the summer to just do kind of like around the coastline sort of road trips. And there's just all kinds of spots there. And yeah, I'm revisiting spots that I went to when I was a kid, or that I've been to probably a dozen times. And they're still just perfect and beautiful. And yeah, so yeah, it's quite nice. I mean, there's so many spots, especially up in northern Michigan.
I love going back to places that I've been before with new gear, whether it be a new camera or a new lens. I often think about, I got this upcoming trip. I've been there with the 50 Summilux, for example, but I've never shot images with the 135. Is that something that goes through your mind as well when you're anticipating a new trip?
Yeah, I mean, packing gear and thinking about what to bring on a trip is always tricky. I think any photographer kind of has that sort of 3 hour struggle before they have to leave for the airport. The reality is, I take my whole kit. I mean, I only travel with my Leica M kit, and that's what, 5 lenses, and the camera's not too big, and and in terms of like if you think about other camera makers, some of the lenses are so large. All the M lenses are quite small, so I just bring them all the time. And I've had kind of a full kit from, I would say, in terms of focal lengths, from as wide as 18 all the way up to the 135 for several years now. I mean, at least a decade or so. So I just bring them all. Yeah.
You can't go wrong when you have all the tools with you, right? It's not one of those things where when you're traveling, for me, it's like, oh, I forgot the macro lens. I forgot the one thing that I needed right now, but there's definitely benefit to have everything next to you. Let's look at some more shots here. This one was shot with the Leica M6. Could you share a bit more about how you got this shot?
Yeah, this is a fun shot. I mean, it's kind of just a snapshot, but this was on a commercial shoot for a client, and it was kind of a moment in between, or between the actual shoot, the commercial shooting we were doing, and my colleague was sort of standing behind. And this is a big kind of 12 by 12, probably actually bigger than that, diffusion scrim, and it was just with the light behind its backlit. So we were just playing around, and it turned out to be quite a nice image. But yeah, this is on the M6, so this is film. And shot with a 35mm lens, if I remember correctly, I think it was Portra that I shot that on. And this was in Shanghai.
And we've been talking for a little bit, and did you mention that the M6 was your first Leica M camera? Was that correct?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was very fortunate. It was not only my first Leica, it was my first camera. It's my starter camera, if you will. I mean, I've always been interested since I was a kid in cameras and photography. But it wasn't until college that I really started to use a camera kind of regularly and really figure out like, aperture and ISO and shutter speed and all that kind of stuff. And I learned on a M6, and it was only because I had a roommate who had, at the time I wasn't super familiar with Leica or, cameras in general. But he happened to have an M6 laying around. He wasn't using it much, so I just picked it up and started figuring it out and playing with it, and was using it from then on, pretty much. And that was, I mean, I'm showing my age a little bit, but that was almost 25 years ago. So yeah, I learned on the M6, and I still have an M6. I still use it. It's not the original one that I learned on, but I have my own M6, and it's a bit of a kind of a forever camera, if you will. A camera that I don't shoot as much as I'd like to now, but I do get back to it, and it's still a lot of fun. But it's also a camera I know I'm gonna keep forever, and I can shoot forever, and maybe hand it down to my kids.
So we talked about the M6, we talked about the M11. I'm guessing that because you started with the M6, you started with film, you transitioned then to digital, perhaps through the M240 or the M10. What was that experience for you like, starting with film and then moving to digital? There are different rules, obviously, but it's still an M. It's still the same kind of rules when it comes to aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Love to hear your experience on that.
Yeah, I mean, I had been shooting other digital cameras, if you will, so I was familiar with digital photography. But coming into my first digital M, yeah, you know, the reality is it didn't feel too much different, if I'm, you know, recalling the experience clearly. But yeah, you know, because the design and the ergonomics and the whole experience has kind of been so consistent throughout all the M's. I don't remember it being jarring or anything like that. In fact, it was just a nice transition. Yeah, that's kind of what I remember about it. And then going from I've had the Type 240, that was my first digital M. I've kind of graduated through the M line as the new products were released. I went from the Type 240 to an M10, to an M10R, and now I'm at the M11.
And I'm sure what helped a lot with that transition is that you're using the same lenses. So at least half of the system feels at home when you're focusing. But yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. I think that for people that are going from digital to film or vice versa, the experience can be similar just from the fact that the lens mount hasn't changed. I think that's a huge part of why people like to kind of have both cameras on hand just in case. At least for when they're not shooting with the film camera, it acts as another way to have quickly access to another lens that you may want to switch out. So I think that's great.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, having Leica lenses, those are kind of forever lenses, you know. So yeah, I've used them on the M6 and on all my digital M's, just the same.
Let's look at some more shots here. This one, I believe, from Tokyo in Japan. So as you mentioned, you travel a lot. What are some of the things that you have learned through your travels when it comes to photography? Do you learn more about, as far as, you know, the new environments, do you learn more about yourself as far as, okay, I'm attracted toward these kinds of landscapes or these kinds of subjects, or maybe these kinds of colors or geometry? I'm seeing a lot of this come back up with your work, where you're focusing on these kind of big themes. Have you thought more about that as far as how the travels that you're having influence your work?
Yeah, I mean, look, travel's a big part of my life, and it has been that way. I mean, when I started photography, I mean, one of the reasons why I really got into photography was it was in college, like I mentioned, and it was about the same time that I started to have the opportunity to start traveling and sort of get that travel bug, and they kind of developed hand in hand. And I mean, look, photography and having a camera with me it's just a nice way to stay really engaged in the process of exploring a new place. I mean, it helps me kind of take that sort of outsider observer role, and just kind of stay curious, pay attention, look around a bit more, notice more stuff. Um, and you know, when I see something that's interesting, and of course what those things are that are interesting to me over the years have changed and evolved, but when I see something interesting, I point my camera at it and just kind of explore. um, and the stuff that I'm looking for, I mean, you know, like I'm mostly, first and foremost, just looking for interesting light. I mean, if I can find some kind of just beautiful rendering of light, usually sunlight, but sometimes some other available light, maybe an artificial light that's casting an interesting shadow on the wall, or sunlight that's refracting through a window in an interesting way. I mean, as long as I can find a nice piece of light, I can always find a way to kind of take an interesting photo and explore that environment a bit more.
I'm looking through the chat right now, and people are commenting about the graphic nature and the deep color that you have in your images. And you spoke a little bit about it already with your response regarding light. The question in the chat is, what attracts you first when making a picture? You mentioned light. How much does color influence your decision as far as, yeah, this is the shot I'm going to take?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely a few things that I'm kind of always evaluating whenever I'm, I guess, on the street or walking around. And like I said, the first thing is light. I need to have interesting light in my frame for it to inspire me to kind of take a photo. And of course, the second thing is color. I love color. I need a big color block, or maybe the whole image is kind of washed over in a certain color. I mean, I think right now you're kind of on this image of the barren tree with that blue background. I mean, for me, that's just a big blue color block with some really interesting patterns, this sort of organic compositions. So I need some of that color. It's either one big color, or maybe it's a couple of different color blocks coming together and working in a fun way, to maybe contrast with the subject. So light, color. I mean, the other thing is just contrast in general, and that could be with light, or it could be with the kind of subject matter of the photo, like sort of two things in the photo that contrast interestingly. The other thing is I love, although in a couple of the images that are on screen now, there's no people, but I love to have people involved, some kind of human element. So I'm always looking for that. That could be something very direct, like a portrait, or it could just be maybe like a hand, reflecting in a window, or it could just be like a silhouette or a shadow of a person. So I kind of have to have some human element, some people element in there. And the last thing is I love to somehow capture motion, or at least the feeling of motion in an image, or some kind of movement. So those are kind of the ways that I evaluate, hey, is this an interesting image that I want to capture? There's some other things as well, of course, but those are kind of the broad strokes.
And I'm seeing this right now with this image right here, where you're using color as a framing device, right? It really adds to fill out the rest of the frame, but your subject matter is being framed by those colors. And I think that, your eye automatically goes to the center of the image where the eyes are, but then if you let yourself wander a little bit, you have all these beautiful colors and blur and things like that happening. And also a mixture of different kinds of geometrical elements, right? You have kind of these soft lines happening on the left-hand side with the bokeh at the very bottom, and then these very straight lines happening on the right-hand side, which adds to the contrast that you're describing in your photography.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the other thing that I kind of holistically think about with images, of course, is, which I think came through in the comments from the audience, is just like, I have a pretty graphic approach to making images, and that comes from, I guess, my more general creative background. I mean, like I said, I work as a creative director, and I do a lot of design work, and I'm thinking about images, and image making beyond just like the frame lines of the camera. I'm thinking about how it's going to lay out with type, and how does it work maybe with another image layered on top of it, and this kind of a thing. So I kind of bring that sort of creative director thinking into my photography, and sometimes it comes through. I think you can see in some of the images that you've selected for the chat. It's definitely very strong graphic kind of feel to them.
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's another thing that kind of, yeah.
I can totally see that. I think that you're right. When you look at an image like this, I can totally see this being on a magazine spread with like the title in the sky, that kind of thing. But because those elements are not there, but you're thinking about those elements, there's kind of this expansiveness that I'm feeling where, I love that there's still that balance, right? The sky is kind of really overpowering, but then still balancing your subject mid-run, right? And then those layers of, you got the sky, you got the clouds, and then you have the grass. All of these kind of layers are again seen in this particular shot right here, and also with the human element. I'm feeling we're getting all the elements together here in this particular shot.
Yeah, I love this photo. This photo is a bit of an accident. I mean, I was actually photographing my son, let's say 10 seconds before this. And this was in, I forget some of it. This was, okay, so this is in Japan at, where was this? This was at the Bawako Valley Ski Resort. Basically a big ski resort near Kyoto. And during the summer, they turn it into kind of this sort of park where you can come and basically run the slopes, and they've got some other stuff there. It's actually beautiful. It's you could take pictures here all day. But anyways, I have my son, he's 6, and this kind of these sort of rolling hills, and for a 6-year-old, it's like paradise. So he was kind of running around, and he had actually kind of tumbled down the hill a bit. And so my camera was focused. I was basically wanted to take a similar photo to this with my son, but he ended up rolling down the hill, and my wife was running after him to kind of look after him. He was fine; it was no big deal. But anyways, it created this really funny image with a nice little story behind it, and just all the elements were just perfect here. The clouds, you got the moon. You've got really nice kind of horizontal light coming in. This was late afternoon. If you can tell, the light's coming from behind her on the right side of the frame. You've got motion, which is a big part of what I'm looking for. The hair kind of up in the air. It's just got a lot of energy and youthfulness, and it feels very summer. I just love this. It's a great photo. I love it.
And shot with a longer lens. I'm seeing the compression there. That really helps with the moon. If it was a wider angle lens, you just wouldn't see those kinds of details quite as well. Yeah.
This is with the 9. This is with the. I shot this with the 90mm Summicron. Yeah.
Now, there are some people in the chat that are asking about, you mentioned how you have 5 lenses. We talked about the 135. We talked about the 18. There's a couple of 50 Summilux shots that you have in this slide as well. What are your other lenses that you like to use when you're traveling?
Yeah, so my kit has, let me see here. So I have the, and Nathan, you would know if I'm mispronouncing, or I have the titles of these lenses wrong, but I have the 16, 18, 21, or is that it's called the Tri-Elmar. That's kind of for my really wide, for my really wide stuff. I've got a 28mm. That's a third-party lens maker. I've got a 35 Summicron. That's like a 50 Summilux. That's like the 90 Summicron, and then the 135. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's actually 6 lenses that I kind of always have with me.
And one of them is 3 focal lengths. So you have some room to play with.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that super wide. It's great. I've been shooting, commercial or whatever, professional photography for 25 years. I'm still trying to figure out the best, most interesting ways to use those kind of really wide lenses. And I love having it in my kit. I underuse it for sure. So if anyone has any tips for how to really make use of those wide lenses, share them through.
Especially if you're used to shooting with like longer lenses, like the 90, the 135, where for me at least, naturally, I'm at a certain distance from my subject because I want those layers, or I'm trying to frame my subject, which, with those wider focal lengths, you really have to get close to create that depth, similar depth at least to a longer focal length. And I understand how it's kind of strange when you just switching out the lens, you have to kind of rethink your positioning in the world to get a good shot.
Yeah, it's fun though. I do love that. I do love using it. I just don't use it as much as I should. I love that kind of, you're almost creating, the distortion, and the sort of proportions are almost like superhero proportions, or a little bit surreal. Really fun to use.
Yes, super fun indeed. Let's look at some other shots. Adam, this is one of my personal favorites that you have shared with us. The streaks of color and light perfectly framing your subject here. Please tell us, how did you get this shot? This is such a beautiful shot.
Yeah, this one, I'll be honest right off the bat, it's pretty lucky to have turned out this way. I mean, what I saw when I took the photo was the subject's face, which is actually my wife. She was getting into a cab, not a cab, but an Uber, and it had a glass ceiling. The car make had a glass ceiling, and I was going up basically I'm walking up a stairwell next to her as she was getting in the car and waiting at the stop sign to get going. And of course, I saw her face lit up like that. That's pretty much all I saw, and I thought, hey, that's kind of interesting. So I quickly kind of turned around and was hoping just to kind of get the face lit up with that green light. But as I took the shot, and because this was in the evening, I had a slower shutter speed. On the side of the car sped by it must have been like a double-decker bus, or at least one of the city buses, and I just happened to snap the photo at the right time, and it kind of created these light streaks across that sort of glass rooftop that she was looking through. So it's just like a little bit serendipitous sort of luck, and it worked out really nicely. But yeah, this is a really fun image, and it's my wife's from Shanghai, and we live in Shanghai, and this for me is like a very Shanghai image. Like, it just has that kind of a little bit of a cyberpunk kind of a vibe. It has speed, it kind of gives that sense of like a frantic city, but then like, having being kind of trapped inside the city. Yeah, it's just yeah. But most of it was luck, to be honest with you.
Is it
just
luck,
like
or is
random
it
timing.
is it luck, or is it the decisive moment? I feel like you knew exactly what was going on, and you had it. You had your finger on the shutter. No, this is absolutely insane. I mean, one of my favorite things about this shot is what you described just right now, the movement of the light and the colors contrasting with how serene your wife looks, right? She's
Right.
kind of laid back, right? And I feel like that element really makes the shot. If she was, standing up, or she had a different expression, it wouldn't work quite as well. And of course, the sunglasses, that's a nice little detail that I appreciate.
Thanks. Yeah, this is a great image. I love it too.
Here's some other shots here. This time again with the M11 with the 135, getting a little closer to your subjects, shooting right into the sun. Please tell us a little bit more about this particular shot.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can tell from some of the other images you selected. I mean, I kind of love playing with that shooting right into the sun feeling. I mean, this was just, we were traveling. This was in the southwestern part of China, in a place called Mili in Yunnan province. And it was just a fun moment. I mean, we arrived at this beach quite late, just before the sunset. And my wife was just thrilled that we had the beach all to ourselves, and she was just kind of dancing. Actually, she was dancing with our son. He's not in the frame, but because I was actually shooting like landscapey shots, and I saw her dancing, and I was able to just kind of frame her into the shot, and then kind of put the sun right behind her. It's always nice to kind of have that sun kind of coming through, that sort of sun-kissed vibe coming through the hair. And then it's kind of nice. She had that dress on that was a little bit transparent, so the light comes through a little bit on the bottom. And yeah, this image is great. The color, that sort of warm summer orange drenched feeling. It's full of kind of like vitality and just the joy of the moment. It's too bad I couldn't, because I had the long lens, and it was kind of quickly adjusting over to her to capture her. I couldn't get my son in there because he was to the left, just to the right here, also dancing with her.
Yeah, I love the gradation in the sky from the where the sun is, and then it goes through the mountains. But then your wife is not completely in silhouette. There's still a ton of detail, but I think that the shapes really make the image, as far as the movement in her hair, movement of her arms. It definitely fits within what you were looking for as far as color, the graphic nature of your images. Yeah, really love this shot. And
yeah, I
considering,
mean, oh, go ahead. Yeah, I mean, in terms of shapes, I mean, that's something maybe I could have mentioned earlier when I was talking about just how I think about whether or not I want to take a photo, or sort of what makes an image interesting to me. I mean, yeah, I mean, the shapes, and especially when you're shooting people, I always think about sort of arms and legs as ways to create like leading lines almost, to your subject. And in this case, it's maybe not so true, but in a portrait, it can be. There's a couple of portraits later that I think speak to that. But yeah, kind of having, limbs extended, and it just gives a sense of kind of movement and openness and freedom. And it also just creates some really nice sort of lines in the composition, for sure.
Absolutely. And let's continue that with this image right here. Got a question from the chat, which is, what are or were your influences in art and photography, and how has those influences affected your photography?
Wow, that's a big question. I think in terms of color, although I would never ever compare myself to, but like Sal Leiter, like the way that he used
Sure.
color, is just, it's incredible, and that's had a big strong influence on me. I mean, I don't think I use color the same way he does, but when I saw how he used it and the way it, kind of moves you and really pulls you into an image, I mean, I try my best to kind of use color in that way. So for sure, he's one of my influences photographically. I don't know. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. I've never really, although I have a whole wall full of photography books, and I'm always looking at them. I mean, there's no sort of single. It's probably just a combination of different elements from all these kind of masters that sort of influences us as we make our own images. But Sail Lighter is the one that comes to mind most.
Are there perhaps any other art forms that inspire you, whether it be music or perhaps dance or movies that somewhat connect to what you do with your photography?
Yeah, I mean, movies for sure. I mean, it's if you can create a still in. I mean, I'm always trying to get a little bit of little bit of kind of a cinematic feeling in my photos. I mean, as best I can. So so it almost feels like it's a frame from a movie, and then when the viewer sees it, they can kind of fill in the blanks of what the story is. And so of course, filmmaking and movies has an influence. I mean, graphic. I come back to graphic kind of. Graphic design is a big influence as well on my stuff.
Uh,
Yeah.
So we got some more M shots here that we've been displaying. And one of the questions is, do you prefer using the rangefinder to compose your images into focus, or do you like using the live view? I know that I personally, for example, love using the live view for the 135. It gives me a good idea what's going on in my frame, but love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much use the viewfinder exclusively. Well, let me reframe. Let me start over. I don't really use the back screen on the camera when I'm shooting. I don't know. There's something about the ergonomics or I guess the positioning of the camera that I've never been used to that. I mean, I started on the M6, and that's how I really had to learn how to use a camera and compose images. So I love having the camera up next to my face. But I will use it occasionally, I suppose, if I'm in really awkward positions, like if the camera's on the ground, like you can't really get your eye in the viewfinder sometimes when it's really low, or if it's really high, if you're just kind of putting the camera above your head to sort of shoot over something or to get a little bit of a higher angle, you kind of have to rely a bit on the back screen. And then I do use an EVF. I think it's the EVF2 I have for the M11. I do use that just because my eyes the past few years have kind of gone on me, if you will. So it's. I used to be able to focus the 90 through the rangefinder, but it's a bit tricky for me now with my eyes. And then the 135, I absolutely need to use the EVF to get really critical focus. Yeah.
Yeah, those lenses
But
have
anything below the
extremely.
anything below the 90, I'm using through the viewfinder.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think, the 90 and the 135, and the 90 is an f2, the 135 is a 3.4. especially with the 135, people assume that, oh, you have 3.4, you have a lot of room to play with. It's a long focal length. It's a long lens. The depth of field is very shallow,
Yeah.
and you have to be very precise if you're using the viewfinder and take your time. So I totally understand your perspective on that. Here's a
Yeah.
shot that I would love to stay on for a little bit. Again, bringing out the graphical nature of your work here. Was this also happenstance that the subject was in yellow as well? Was this planned?
This is actually this is in Taipei, I believe. Yeah, in Taipei. This was the M10 shot with the 50 millimeter Summicron. It's a kind of a funny story. We were there shooting for a sports apparel brand client of ours, and I had originally suggested this shot like in the pre-production and location checks. I saw these yellow lines, and I thought, oh, and we had a higher vantage point. I thought it'd be really cool to kind of have the subject running across the frame here, because some of the wardrobe that we were shooting for the client was also in yellow. And for me, like, you know, when you work on a commercial shoot, you have like one or two shots that you're kind of like your money shots, and you if you can get those, you're excited. The shoot's kind of a success, and you're happy. You know, you're happy because usually all the other images are big compromises with the client. Anyone who shoots commercially knows this. But anyways, I was really excited about this, proposing this to the client, but the client didn't go for it. And so anyways, we didn't shoot it for the client, but my wife, who at this time was producing the shoot, we came back the next day, and she just happened to have a yellow dress, and we decided, hey, if we love this shot so much, we should try to find a way to capture it ourselves. So we came back and just shot it on our own the next day.
That's so amazing. I totally understand the itch of an image that needs to be created, where you find a spot, you find the light, you find a subject, and maybe at this, you know, at the present time you can't do it for whatever reason, but there's something that stays in your mind, right? You're like, I can't leave the city without getting this shot. So
No,
I know
you can't let it
exactly
go.
what you mean. And then
Yeah, this
if you
one worked
miss it,
out.
no, please go ahead.
No, this one worked out perfectly. I mean, we only had a few minutes to grab it because I think we were catching our flight back to Shanghai. But yeah, it worked out really well. I mean, the colors, of course, are that yellow on yellow, and with that kind of black concrete, that sort of tarmac kind of finish. It's great. The hair kind of up, the arm and the leg behind her, giving you that sense of motion and movement. Just a ton of fun.
Let's go for some more images here. To have some more questions from the chat as well.
Sure.
Social media question. What role does it play in your professional work? Are clients finding you there, or is it more of a personal record of your travels or your family life?
Yeah, I mean, I've been shooting commercially for, I don't know, 15 plus years, in kind of courting clients for that long. I've never had one client come to me for like a campaign shoot or like a big commercial shoot through social media. Not to say that can't happen, but it's never happened for me. It's all just been, you know, on the ground, in market, networking, and just kind of getting recommended by, you know, other clients, or this sort of word of mouth marketing, if you will. So in that sense, I don't use social media so much to promote my commercial work. My social media is really just personal shots for the most part. I mean, there's a handful of commercial stuff on there, but it's like 90% just personal work, or shots that I got while I was traveling, or more often well, my son is 6, so the past 5-6 years, there's actually quite a bit of family stuff on there. Yeah, so social media has never really been, for my commercial shooting, it's never really been a factor, to be honest.
I think it's nice to have it be separated. I know there's a lot of people that connect the two, and obviously that's one way you could go about this. But I think there's really it's nice to just say, I'm just shooting for myself. There's no rules. I don't have to abide by. Oh, I can't put this shot up because it won't work for my professional business. I know. I also feel like it's an opportunity for you to always be involved with photography, because there's not these pressures around you you just have your camera, you just shoot whatever you want, and perhaps it gives you more ideas for a shoot where you're like, I went to this spot with my camera, this would be a great opportunity to do this particular project, without all that stress that comes with being in a professional environment, especially with photography.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really nice. I mean, yeah, in some ways, my social media is a bit of a reaction to my commercial work, just because, you know, I'm unfortunately not one of those commercial photographers that are hired for a very specific personal photo style, if you will. I'm kind of more hired to shoot a bunch of different styles and just execute, the way the kind of client wants. So a lot of the work that I produce commercially, um, although it's technically sound, it's probably not, for me, not the most creatively inspiring work. Not all the time. Sometimes it is, but for the most part, it isn't. So having an outlet outside of that where I can just get back to kind of pure photography and just sort of shooting the stuff that I want to shoot, or the stuff that inspires me, it's great to have that.
Absolutely. Now, I want to stop a little bit on these two shots right now. I think these are both from Taiwan, and I believe they're both with the M10 and 50 Summicron. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about how you got the left shot? Are you on top of a mountain and shooting down? How's this happening?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, actually, this is not in Taiwan. This is in, that's a typo on the document. Sorry, Nathan. But this is actually in Yunnan, which is southwest China. It's a place that my family and I travel to quite a bit. Anyway, this is kind of that sort of terraced farming environment. We're kind of on the side. I'm positioned on the side of a mountain, I guess you could say. Yeah, it was more of like a big hill, looking over kind of a balcony. And I just happened to see this horse just hanging out there, with these really nice, coming back to kind of graphics and leading lines, these really nice kind of terraced, little, I guess you could say, these little terraced cliffs that he was roaming around. And this is definitely shot with either a 90 or a 135. It's a longer lens because the horse was quite a bit farther down the mountain.
Sure.
But yeah, the green, green is one of these colors that I never really liked photographing. It's kind of grown on me as I've gotten older, but the green is just really nice here. And then the horse works really well in terms of his position in the overall frame, but because his background is the sort of lighter water, there's a nice contrast. He still popped in the frame. This is just another example of kind of like these sort of organic compositions that sort of nature just presents you. And you see it and you have to capture it.
Definitely. And what about the shot on the right with the shadow? How was that framed?
Yes, this is there's quite a few images. I think there's a few more coming later that she selected, but I love playing with shadows and silhouettes. It's a little bit of kind of less is more sort of storytelling approach with photos. I mean, you obviously see a bit less with a shadow or a silhouette, but when you look at it later, or as the photographer, or as like just a third party kind of viewing an image, it says a bit more, or it kind of leaves more room for the imagination to kind of build a story. So anytime I can take some of these fun kind of really hard light, hard contrasty shadows or silhouette shots, I usually go for it. And this is just one with my wife. At the time, she had this wild kind of frizzy perm haircut, so that kind of worked well with the hair, and a nice kind of fluffy shape on the top, and the arms and the legs kind of came in nicely there with in terms of shape. And I kind of liked how the shadow is distorted across the, it comes in on the floor and then it comes up the wall. It was just a fun kind of graphic composition that caught my eye and we grabbed.
Yeah, I think that the fact that there's that distortion that you're describing where the legs only appear on the floor and they're kind of like elongated, I think that's what really makes the shot. If the distortion wasn't there, it wouldn't be quite as interesting because it's, a normal figure, so to speak. But the distortion adds a little bit of intrigue to the shot. because something is not quite right, and so you're looking for clues in the shot there. So that's a nice one.
Yeah, it's fun.
And then I want to share these two shots right here, which I have been trying to create myself when I'm traveling. I see this scene all the time, right? The lines directly onto like the wall, everything's parallel, everything's extremely well framed. I want to draw attention first to the shot on the right, because there's a lot of stuff going on. You have those lines that kind of bring you up to the main subject that's on the next to the wall there. But then you have those pops of colors that we've been talking about. You have the sign, the flag, and just other little details that you frame that you let the viewer kind of explore by themselves. And I really appreciate that about your work, where you can look at it really quickly and see, oh, this is extremely well framed. But then if you take a little more time, there's other little details that pop out that make the shot even more interesting. What were you thinking when you were seeing this shot right here? Was it just the lines that you saw first, and then the subject, or perhaps the subject first?
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw the lines first. And then, of course, the symmetry of the flag, and then the pole down the middle. That was probably what first pulled me in. And then, of course, there's the human element. There's the police officer there on the wall. And then I did see the bird too. And I took a few shots whenever I kind of framed this up. And I was waiting for either the bird to look at the bird and the police officer look at each other, or what ended up happening, that didn't happen. But they were both looking away, which is, I think, kind of equally interesting, as if they're trying to avoid each other, or they're working together to scope the scene out. One's looking to the left, one's got the right covered. It just worked out. It was a really fun image. And a nice hit of red in the middle of the image with the Chinese flag there is fun. And then you have that sort of yellow, black, white of the concrete on the road.
Yes.
Yeah, and the lines, everything's kind of 90 degrees or parallel. So the graphic element is there. The lighting is not great, but because the other elements, I think, are interesting enough, it carries the image.
Sure. And what about the image on the left? Using, again, shapes to frame your subjects as they roll on by. Was this where was this shot?
This is in Shanghai. Both of these shots are in Shanghai. The shot on the left actually is interesting. I had been this backdrop, right, with the yellow door and that sort of pink wall with the baby blue, and then the kind of teal, this sort of sherbet colored wall. It was super interesting to me, and I kept going by it on my way to work, and I just kept thinking, I got to find a way to use this wall to just do something fun. It's such an interesting wall because of the colors, and it was clean, and the layout was clean. So, and it was actually right about the time where I believe I just got my 135. This was kind of a test shot. I was thinking, oh, I got this new lens. I've got this location that I want to kind of play with or get some kind of an image out of it. So I went over to this spot, and actually, because it was a little bit dark, it was a little bit later in the day, the lighting was a little bit dark, I actually used a tripod, because with the 135, of course, you've got to worry about shutter speed, and if I didn't have enough daylight. So I put it on. I basically framed up this shot, and then I put it on the tripod. And I just was thinking, okay, so let's just wait until something interesting comes by. And my luck, this gentleman on this, I don't even know what this thing is called, but it came cruising by, cool as a cucumber, and I put, I shot it with. Oh boy, I'm forgetting how to. What's the phrase for when the shoot rapidly?
Continuous shooting.
There you go. Sorry. I put it on continuous shooting, and I saw him coming, and I was like, I would love to capture him right in that yellow part, because he's got the dark. He's wearing kind of a dark clothing, and it'll give us a nice pop of contrast. And I ended up getting. I think I took 10 frames as he was cruising by, and this was one of them. But then there's a little detail here, which I think is even adds more fun to the image. I don't know if viewers can see it, but the Captain America shield on his hoverboard or whatever this thing is called. I just thought that was super cute and a ton of
Yeah.
fun. And of course I didn't notice that when I was shooting him because he was coming by quite quickly. But I think it kind of makes the shot extra special.
I totally agree. It adds that layer of contrast, right, between the topics, so to speak, of this image right here. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And also his angle too, I think is super interesting. How he's just kind of got that. He's just kind of angling forward as he cruises across the frame. His hands behind his back, very cool, very calm. It's almost surreal in a way, but I really like this one.
It looks like they're floating or something. It does contrast with the straight lines of the building. So that works, your eye goes directly to it. That's awesome. I got another question for you from the chat regarding editing. What is your approach to editing? Do you tend to get the editing process done right away during your travels, or do you see value in waiting to review your work after letting some time pass?
I do a little bit of both, to be honest. If I'm super excited about an image where I'm out traveling or whatever, I'm on a city walk and I capture something that I know is a banger, I want to get home right away and kind of and really polish it, and edit it. But the reality is, most of my images I kind of slowly chip away at in terms of editing, and I think that's great because it kind of gives you a bit of distance. There's often images that I still go back to stuff in my archive, 5, 8, 10 years ago that never really made it into the selects folder, and I see it now and I think, this is kind of interesting. There's something here that I didn't notice the first time around. And so that's I think there's a lot of value in that. Keep your images. The real junk ones, get rid of them, but the ones that are kind of borderline, keep them, because they come back to you. Because what's going on, I find, at least with me, is every few years there's a few new layers or sedimentation to kind of my aesthetic sensibilities. Things that I find beautiful, or things that I find interesting, or things that I think are I don't know, inspiring. Like over the years that evolves and it changes and it kind of grows. And so when you take that perspective and then you look back on old images, you're gonna find some gems that you kind of overlooked before. This happens all the time for me.
Absolutely. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I connect it to the experience. I've gained experience, whether using the tool that I'm using or using the editing software that I like to use, or my experience in watching other people and seeing other people's work and giving me new ideas. It's a process. Absolutely. Keep those DNGs handy and an SSD somewhere, and then come back to them. I think you're right. It is fun to have that process. And also for me, it's an opportunity to kind of see where I am now, right? Like if you're looking at that stuff that was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you realize, oh, I've grown since then. I'm composing images differently, or I look at the world differently. And I think that's super rewarding to come back to those images for that reason alone as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we're going to end right here with this shot, another favorite of mine of your work. Would you mind sharing a little more about how this shot came about?
Yeah, for sure. This is one of my favorites as well. I absolutely love it. This is in Shanghai, shot on an M10R, a longer lens. This was the 90mm Summicron. Yeah, I was just out and about with my son. This is on the Pudong side of Shanghai, which is on one side of the river. There was a new park that opened up here, and this is just an overpass. And I kept seeing it's actually an overpass for like a bike lane or like a bike path. And so there's just these endless bikes kind of coming across this this sort of wall that protects the overpass. And I kept seeing these shadows, and I thought, oh, it's super interesting how from this perspective you see these figures kind of coming across the frame, but you don't see the figures, you just see the shadow. It was almost like a shadow puppets, if you will. And then there was a young kid up there that had this red balloon. He kept riding back and forth, and I thought, oh, that's super interesting. That it's like that's the only real element that's kind of in this frame, and it reminded me quite a bit of Nathan. You might appreciate this because you have you grew up in France, but like I don't know if you remember, there was an old movie called The Red Balloon, an old French short film, and it was I remember watching it when I was a kid, and it just as soon as I saw that when I was there, I immediately thought of that movie, and I thought, oh, that's super cool. So I wanted to try to capture that red balloon sort of floating along as the kid on the bike, sort of it was tied to his bike. And so yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a bit of shadow play, or yeah, these are shadows, not silhouettes. Yeah, shadow play, and then a bit of this sort of element, this red element, which feels a little bit surreal because it's not really attached to any real person, but it's the only real thing in the frame, and it's just a nice
Right.
little pop of it's a nice little pop of color against that blue, and the lighting is quite nice too here. It's you can see, you know, it's always nice in an image whenever you can create a sense of motion with light gradient. Like if you can, like for example, you see that the light is coming from the right side of the frame, but the right side of the frame is also brighter than the left side of the frame. So for me, that always, I don't know, when I see an image, someone else's image that has that, I immediately kind of get a sense of motion, and I like it when I have that in my images. So this image has that as well. Yeah, and of course, just a beautiful blue sky with some fluffy clouds. Yeah.
You mentioned movies. The thing that reminds me of this shot is, I don't know if you've seen this before, where back where movie making was just starting, and I believe it actually was in France as well, where there's a multiple images of a horse like galloping.
Yeah.
It's just multiple shots, and
Yeah.
you have a contraption that you could kind of spin around, and the horse would start to move.
Yeah.
Because your subjects here are like almost perfectly separated individually by this space. It's not one is farther away from the other. It reminded me of that kind of cycle, right? Because it has the bars, it has the
Yeah.
shadows, and then the motion that you're describing with the light. I'm seeing that. I'm seeing the kind of the vibration and the movement, behind the scenes, so to speak. But then after, like you
Yeah.
said, the balloon kind of sets a good baseline of where reality is. What is actually happening? Who is holding
Yeah.
this balloon? There's a lot of mystery to the shot, but I think there's a lot of just playfulness that is just really appealing because everybody has seen these kinds of shots. I've seen people riding bikes and things like that, but having it done in such a beautiful, and the composition is so geometric, which I personally love, really adds to the impact of the shot. So really nicely done.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, folks, this is going to be the end of our program. But before we say goodbye to Adam, I want to share a couple of Academy workshops that we have. First of all, we have our Leica product workshops. If you just purchased a Leica camera, or you want to learn more about your current Leica camera, you can join us during these workshops. They are both online and in person, and you can use the QR code here on the slide to learn more. We also have workshops both on the East Coast and West Coast. Here's an example of this with Jim Sullivan working on food photography in New York in October. We also have something completely different with Rudy Gonzalez teaching you about how to photograph rodeos in Texas. And also on the West Coast with Mark DePaula teaching you about portraiture in Los Angeles. If you want to learn more about Adam and his work, here is his handles on Instagram and his website. Adam, before we part, what is next for you? What are you excited about?
Well, right now I just had a son. My second son was born, so for the next few months, I'm
Congrats.
pretty focused. Thank you. I'm pretty focused on him. So there might be a couple extra family photos in my Instagram feed of the little one.
Nice. Love to see that. Well, folks, thanks again for joining us today. Adam, thank you for your time and for showing your images with us. And folks, I look forward to see you on the next one. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Bye-bye.